Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. In March of 2022, the apartment next to mine was rented out to two young women, Jessica and Emily, who were both college students. After they settled in for a few weeks, it became clear they wanted to start partying. Now, I'm not against having a good time, but this was right in the middle of a COVID surge and there were strict rules about gatherings and visitors. But youth will be youth, so I tried to be understanding. At that time, I was working at a nursing home helping care for elderly residents affected by COVID. My job meant long hours and a grueling commute, often leaving me totally drained by the end of the day. So, while I accepted some noise was inevitable living downtown, I wasn't looking forward to raging parties disrupting what little rest I could get. Sure enough, Jessica and Emily went ahead with their party plans, and it was an absolute rager. People were shouting wildly in the hallways, banging on walls, making a general ruckus. Around 4 a.m., I introduced myself and politely asked when they expected their guests, easily over 20 people, to leave, requesting they not host again the next night since I had work very early. They made promises to keep it down, which they didn't, and assured me no more parties. But of course they did throw another bash the following 2 nights. By that point, I was running on practically no sleep for 3 nights straight and was becoming delusional from fatigue. Each night, Jessica and Emily acted remorseful when I confronted them, vowing to do better, but the noisy mayhem continued unabated. I felt terrible too, since my job put me in contact with immunocompromised people that COVID could severely impact. This was before vaccines, before widespread testing, back when we knew much less about the virus. Thankfully, the weekend offered a respite when they visited family. Over the following weeks, they dialed it back from big rowdy parties, but a constant stream of visitors came pouring in at all hours. I'm talking a ridiculous number, like their doorbell was ringing 70 times per night with new people always entering or leaving. And of course, drunk people being loud and obnoxious in our echoey stone hallway. I essentially couldn't sleep at night unless it was Friday to Sunday when they were out of town. It was maddening how they seemed to know an endless supply of party people. One night, when confronting them about the commotion, I encountered my upstairs neighbor Mark, also a Redditor here. We decided to team up to get this under control. Mark revealed the reason for the endless revolving door of guests. Jessica and Emily had turned their place into an unofficial speakeasy since bars were shuttered due to COVID. Worse, a rowdy frat house across the street was operating similarly, with people constantly moving between the 2 residences to mix up the party scene. Our poor hallway had become party central for dozens of drunken law students and their hangers-on. We tried reasoning with Jessica and Emily, as well as the endlessly parading guests, but nobody showed any sympathy when we pleaded for quiet in the wee hours. Most just mocked us as the stereotypical cranky neighbors. Many were too inebriated to care or comprehend. We started calling the police constantly to build a record, but they couldn't intervene if nobody answered the door despite clear audible violations of gathering rules. As a social worker, I knew how to persistently work channels until problems got solved. When the cops shrugged, I cold emailed the dean of the law school detailing the COVID flouting parties thrown by his students, mentioning we were prepping to go to the media with this story of a healthcare worker being disrupted by illegal gatherings. The dean called me back swiftly, vowing to address it. He ultimately phoned Jessica's parents, leading to a big drama where we finally got to confront the girls face to face. Tears flowed, which I had no patience for, as we learned police had cited them multiple times for breaking rules, but the fines didn't deter them. Apparently, the dean had ripped them a new one over the phone and they'd been asleep until 11 a.m., a fact I gleefully seized on as the root issue, given my 6 a.m. wake-ups for work. We vented our grievances, parted on an understanding they'd cut out the partying madness, and hoped to coexist as peaceful neighbors. But obviously that didn't pan out as planned. You'd think they got the message, but nope. The noisy shindigs just shifted across the street to the frat house. Slightly less hallway traffic, but still unbearable, especially as COVID cases surged while I remained essentially quarantined except for work. The hypocrisy of these privileged jerks, blatantly disregarding all guidelines while vulnerable people suffered around me, was infuriating. Mark captured one of their parties on video, which we debated leaking to news outlets. I posted it on our city's Reddit first to gauge sentiment, and most comments sided with us over the reckless scofflaws. Feeling emboldened, I contacted local media outlets while Mark escalated within the university hierarchy to a vice-rector with disciplinary power over the worst offenders. It snowballed from there. One local site picked up our story, confirming details with police about our repeated disturbance calls. We made sure to mention the university being looped in. Once published, the article went viral and was syndicated by every major national news outlet. Headlines shamed the self-absorbed students, keeping an essential worker from sleeping while cops got the runaround. Simultaneously, the vice rector contacted us for statements, promising an investigation and potential disciplinary action. The publicity only intensified when a news crew showed up at my door for interviews, then aired footage of a frat guy admitting on camera to hosting illegal pandemic parties. Long story short, the whole affair eventually blew over, woo, but not before Jessica and Emily faced disciplinary hearings. After smoothing things over with them first, we put in a good word so they only received 40 hours community service plus probation. The egregious frat bros got double that punishment, plus the delightful humiliation of handwriting apologies we could savor. For the rest of that year, a simple text was all it took to swiftly quell any noise from Jessica and Emily's place. Apparently getting publicly shamed on every major news outlet as COVIDiots was the wake-up call these self-absorbed partiers needed. Sadly, that's what it took to finally get peace and quiet to sleep after providing essential services during a crisis. Hopefully, they'll be more conscientious neighbors in the future. The next one is an entitled People story. When my wife and I purchased our dream home last year, we thought we had found our perfect slice of suburban paradise. The house was spacious yet cozy, with a big backyard for our kids and dogs to play. And the neighborhood seemed idyllic, too. Friendly faces everywhere, kids riding bikes down quiet streets, and bright green lawns dotting the landscape. Little did we know the turmoil that awaited. It all started about 3 months after we moved in. I was outside mowing the lawn when a stern-looking woman marched up our driveway. She introduced herself as Helen, the president of the local Homeowners Association. I had no idea such a thing even existed in our neighborhood, but Helen insisted all the homeowners were required to join and follow their rules. She shoved a thick stack of papers in my hand detailing the Homeowner Association guidelines. Then she pointed at our mailbox. Apparently it broke some rule about appearance. Before I could get a word out, she stormed off. I thought it was bizarre, but brushed it off until the letters started coming. Nearly every week I'd find an angry note from Helen complaining about some other supposed violation. Our fence was too high, our grass not green enough, toys left in the yard, you name it. If the Homeowner Association saw anything they remotely disliked, they'd send a scathing letter threatening me with fines. It was ridiculous. One Saturday morning, I'd had enough. After getting yet another nasty gram from Helen, I decided to go straight to the source. Marching up to Helen's front door, I politely but firmly told her we would not be joining their homeowner association, nor paying any of their absurd fines. Free from their harassment at last, or so I thought. The very next day, I was stunned to find a for sale sign staked up on our front lawn. What the heck? Was this Helen's twisted idea of a prank? I yanked out the sign and called her immediately to get to the bottom of it. But she insisted our home was now homeowner association property since I had refused to pay their fines. According to her, this gave them the right to assume ownership and sell it off. My head spun. How could she possibly think this was legal? I told her there was no way I was letting them steal and sell my house, but she simply laughed and said I no longer had any say in the matter. The homeowner association would do as they pleased. That was the last straw. I'd had it with this power-tripping homeowner association and their strong-arm tactics. The very next morning, I contacted my lawyer and explained the whole insane saga. He was shocked at their audacity to attempt seizing my property, but he reassured me that with the proper documentation, their claims would crumble in court. Over the next few weeks, we gathered every shred of evidence: the deed, mortgage paperwork, property taxes in my name. I even had neighbors write statements confirming I was the rightful owner. Meanwhile, the threatening letters from Helen kept coming, but I stood my ground. Finally, we had our day in court. I presented my mountain of proof, while a defiant Helen clung to her baseless arguments. The judge listened patiently, but it was clear. The facts were all on my side. He ruled completely in my favor, affirming I was the sole legal owner. Helen's face turned beet red when he rejected their claims as frivolous and unlawful. Justice served. As we left the courthouse, I turned to Helen and her cronies. This is my home that I rightfully purchased with my own money. Your harassment ends today. A chorus of gaping expressions and muttered curses followed as I walked away with a smile of victory. When I arrived home, the first thing I did was joyfully yank out that ridiculous homeowner association for sale sign from my lawn. As it cracked in two under my hands, I knew that our family could finally breathe easy in our cozy suburban home, free from the overbearing tyranny of the power-hungry homeowner association that tried and failed to steal it away. The next one is a petty revenge story. 20 years ago, I lived in a large apartment complex in the capital of a southern U.S. state. I lived there for 7 years and had a lot of bad experiences. At one point, an upset employee in their office posted signs around the complex alerting renters that in each of the 25 buildings, one of the ground floor units was paying for their building's outdoor lights. Sure enough, I checked my breakers and one of mine turned the outdoor lights on/off. The office admitted to their oversight and offered the affected tenants a piddly sum, saying the lights were on timers. Wrong. Used energy saver bulbs. Wrong. And were fewer in number than the actual count. I replied to their offer to correct their details and revise the amount that should be reimbursed. Because they had known all along, and because they treated responsible tenants like me the same as their crappy tenants, I added a nominal compounding interest rate over my years of tenancy, just the same as the government would charge if you paid your taxes late. Management balked at paying the interest because then they would have to pay interest to the other 24 impacted tenants. After many follow-ups and no satisfactory reply, I contacted the consumer affairs reporter at the region's biggest TV station and provided complete details and documentation. The reporter, who everyone in town recognized, called the complex but didn't get a response from them either. The reporter stopped by and interviewed me on camera in my apartment. Afterwards, as I was leaving for work, they were setting up at the entrance in front of the complex's sign to record the intro to the story. When I got to work, the manager phoned to say they agreed to pay my amount. I called the reporter and found out that while she was recording the intro, the manager drove up in the little golf cart he used to get around the property and said, "What are you doing?" She replied and addressed him by name, saying, "John, you know exactly what I'm doing." He didn't have anything to say. I think when the story aired, they included video of his back as he was driving away. I recorded the story and showed it to the apartment's maintenance crew, and they had a good laugh at his expense. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened my freshman year of college about 20 years ago. My university had just invested in a big new dining hall, and to help pay for their investment required all new students to buy a 150 meal plan both semesters. This was a big financial burden being from a lower middle-class family, but my parents pooled funds to help me out and make it happen. Shortly into my first semester, I found out from friends that the meals you didn't use didn't roll over. Since I lived off campus, I knew I wouldn't be able to use them all. Heading into November, I realized I would end up with 75 meals left over, and I complained about this a lot to family and friends because it seemed like such a waste. In comes the plan. My freshman year of college was also my cousin's senior year, and we hung out pretty often. He was the biggest trickster/prankster type you ever met. One night while we were drinking, he says, "What if you brought a bunch of homeless people to use up your meals? How much would that piss off those self-righteous idiot?" We laughed all night, but the more I thought about the idea, the more I really started to like it. We talked all weekend about it and hatched a plan. On Monday morning, we went down to the local Salvation Army around the corner. I have grown to really despise this organization, but in the early 2000s in small-town USA, it's what we had. We told the lady at the desk I would like to feed people in need with my meal plan. She was hesitant at first, but said she was working with people that this would be a huge blessing to, especially during the holiday season. She helped me organize 2 days the following week where around 30 people would meet me to eat at the dining hall. I would wear a certain hat so they could find me, and we would go eat. The day finally arrived, and all kinds of people were there. There were homeless people in tattered clothes. There were families with kids that seemed excited to eat out. There was even one family I will always remember that seemed embarrassed to take a handout. But I made an effort to talk to everybody and make them feel welcomed. At noon, we headed into the dining hall. I walked up to the lady at the entrance and said, "These people are with me. They are my friends. I would like to swipe them in." She looked confused, but reluctantly said, "Okay." To say we got every reaction humanly possible would be an understatement. There were staff that were obviously annoyed with the influx of diners. There were students that were laughing. There were students that were giving me the silent clap. There were snobbish faculty members that seemed to be disgusted at the type of people coming into the dining hall. I didn't care at all. Eventually, a head staff member came up and said they knew what I was doing and they didn't like it. I said, "These are my friends eating with me. I paid for these meals. Am I doing anything wrong?" She was stumped. The next day, the same situation happened with the same reactions. It seemed that I had caused quite a stir on campus, and it just so happened that the university president was eating there that day. She came up to me and said, even though she would ask that I not tell me friends to do the same thing with their meals as the staff couldn't handle the influx of diners, she was proud that her students had the heart to do something for others like that. The following semester, I did the exact same thing. I even used my meals sparingly so I could bring more people. The one memory that will always stick out in my head is the family with the little kids so excited to go to the pizza bar and soft-serve ice cream machine giggling the whole time. To this day, it's still one of the proudest moments of my life. Me and my friends and family still have a drink and chuckle over the story and the snooty, angry reactions I got. The next one is an entitled people story. So, I am homeless. No, I don't drink. And no, I don't do drugs. I am trying to get a job, but finding employment when homeless is not an easy task. Something I need to get out of the way. Every few days I take a trip to the library to charge my phone and batteries so I can keep my phone on and working. I typically spend 3-4 hours in a quiet corner of the library glued to the power outlet charging. Today I had a cute, then frustrating interaction between a little kid and its parent. I walked through the sliding doors of the library and wandered around looking for an open chair near an outlet to sit and charge. I heard this little voice shout out in excitement and glee, "Santa!" and pitter-patters of little boots running over to me. Now I get it, I really do. A big bearded man dressed in red with big black bags and an oversized backpack strapped over his shoulders. Any little kid would easily mistake me for the big jolly man. The kid stopped dead in front of me. She was clenching her fists tight, trembling in excitement. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. She looked up at me, her eyes opened wide, and uttered the word, "Hi, Santa." That made me smile, and I laughed. Her mother came running over, scooped her child up and said sorry to me, walked away and told her kid that's not Santa. The entire interaction put a smile on my face, but here's where it went downhill. I found an open seat and plugged in to charge and do my thing. The little kid and her parent were on the other side of the library, but the kid was still brimming with excitement. I could see her head poke out of the bookshelf, staring at me every so often. That went on for about half an hour, until, I guess, the mother couldn't handle her child anymore and she came over to me. She asked me to leave and find a different spot because I am distracting her daughter. I said, "Hey, I'm sorry, but this is the only open space with an outlet. I need to charge my stuff." She very sarcastically said, "Oh, why's that?" I replied, "Because I don't have one. I am homeless." I thought that was the end of it because her face went red and she walked away. But no, she came back. She went up to the front desk to ask if there are any outlets outside and if it's okay for me to use them. Seriously. She said that the library is okay with me using the outlet outside to charge so I can go out there. I asked her, "So you don't want me in the library, a public institution, to charge? You would rather me sit outside in the cold just because your kid thinks I'm Santa? Really, that's it." I looked at her and said, "Well, ho ho ho, Merry Christmas to you. I'm going to stay right here until my batteries are charged." The lady went to the front desk, and I listened in because I figured I'm screwed. I'm getting kicked out. She asked them to tell me to leave. They said they can't unless I'm intentionally making a disturbance, being violent or threatening. I've been here before. I keep to myself and don't bother anyone. So, yeah, I was there for 4 hours. I didn't move or get kicked out. My things are charged and good for the next few days. Honestly, not the worst interaction I have ever experienced. At least she was somewhat polite. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, 26F, live in a rented house with a single mother, 30F, and her son, 6M. I had another person living with me, but they moved out and the mother moved in. I don't mind living with her and her kid. It's fine, and we kind of do our own thing. I spend a lot of time at my boyfriend's place or working. Our work schedules collide, so we really don't interact much, but when we do, it's fine. No issue there. I want to start by saying that she clearly struggles financially, but I don't think it's an excuse. I don't make lots of money either. However, I've noticed that my food would go missing or portions would be taken from it. I assumed it was her kid, so I asked her if she'd stop him from eating my food. I was calm about it, and she just said she would. It didn't really upset me when it first started. It started getting annoying when I'd get home from work and expect to have a meal's worth of leftovers in the fridge, only to see it picked through, or just gone. I kept bringing it up, and she started getting annoyed with me bringing it up. Just from observing them, I realized that neither of them ever eats vegetables, and judging by the food that would get picked through and the food that would be untouched, anything with green in it was avoided. Orange chicken would be gone, but chicken and broccoli would be untouched. So I started putting vegetables in everything. I find vegetables to be delicious, and anything green or not a potato does not get eaten. So I could mix some bell peppers into the food, and it would be fine. I make a big portion of vegetables pretty frequently anyway, so I just started putting it in everything I eat. If I had leftover mashed potatoes, I'd pour green beans in and mix it up. If I had leftover cheesy bacon fries, I'd pour broccoli all over it and mix it in. Usually my homemade stuff has vegetables in it, but I started making sure everything did. I made a pot of mac and cheese, the kids' favorite thing, and poured in roasted Brussels sprouts, which is actually delicious to me, and I'm eating more vegetables, so it's a win-win. She had been seeming annoyed, but we were all home when I made the pot of mac and cheese. She was in the living room and saw me get out the Brussels sprouts and was like, "What are you going to do with that?" And I poured them in. She said I was being greedy and annoying. I just said, "I like Brussels sprouts." And that was it. She said, "We need food," and I told her to go get some, or stop buying only prepackaged things and your money will go further. I think she sees this as some big act of revenge, but I just simply want to be able to eat my food. Also, want to add that the sharing is not the issue. It's expecting to have food there, and it's not. So often I'd be working a long day and get home expecting to have a meal's worth of food and it all be gone. Or I wake up in a rush and had my food ready to eat in the morning only to find it gone. So now I have to skip breakfast. If she would simply text sometimes, "Hey, is it okay if we eat food item?" I would know and know to make other plans. I would stop for food or know I have to whip something up when I get home. Also, I think eating the last of someone else's food is crazy and rude. If someone makes a big pot of something and you ask for a serving, sure. But if someone made something and there is one serving left and you eat it without permission, that is evil as hell. The next one is an entitled People Story. Moving into my first apartment with my best friend was supposed to be an exciting time, full of new beginnings and opportunities. But what we found instead was an experience that tested our resilience and left us with a valuable lesson about the importance of researching potential living arrangements before signing a lease. We found the perfect 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood that was surprisingly affordable, even for 2 fresh-out-of-college graduates. The basement was listed as a separate apartment, but we weren't worried as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off. Plus, the thermostat was upstairs. However, things took a turn when our downstairs neighbor moved in. From the start, it was clear that she was not someone we wanted to mess with. She would scream at her mother, call her boyfriend for meth, and even scream at her new puppies. The noise was unbearable, and it only got worse when she started smoking. Our apartment and belongings were filled with smoke, and we could not take it anymore. We contacted the landlord, but he was not much help. He informed us that we lived in a state where an apartment could be called non-smoking, even if it shared ventilation with a smoking apartment. Our lease stated that we were responsible for all utilities, meaning that we were financing her gas, water, and electric. With my 2 roommates gone on vacation, I was left alone in the apartment with the demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't sleep or eat. My stomach was constantly cramping from all the secondhand smoke. After 3 days of being trapped in a smoky hell, I was a little insane. I made a plan to survive the winter with the crazy neighbor. I checked the forecast, borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag, and prepared to live off hot liquids. I turned off the heat and braced myself for the cold. It was a challenge, but I managed to survive the freezing temperatures. The neighbor screamed and complained, but I knew I had to tough it out. Finally, after 6 long days, she left, and I could breathe a sigh of relief. I thought it was all over, but little did I know that the worst was yet to come. A few months after the incident, the police showed up at our door asking if we had any information about the whereabouts of our former neighbor. They told us that she had been reported missing and that her boyfriend Greg was the prime suspect. My heart raced as I realized that I had been living above a potential murderer. It was a surreal experience that left me feeling scared and violated. I was thankful to have moved out and away from the danger that could have threatened my life and those of my roommates. The incident taught me a valuable lesson about the importance of researching potential living arrangements. I now know to do a thorough background check on the landlord and the potential neighbors before signing any lease. But the story doesn't end there. A few years later, I received a call from one of my former roommates. She informed me that the crazy neighbor had been found dead, and the authorities had identified Greg as the perpetrator. The news sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't help but think about how close we had come to danger. The experience taught me to trust my instincts and to be more mindful of the people I let into my life. I now make it a point to do a thorough background check on anyone I meet, and I encourage others to do the same. Surviving the winter with the crazy neighbor was a lesson in resilience, and I'm grateful for the experience that taught me how to protect myself and my loved ones. In my opinion, surviving the winter with the crazy neighbor is a thrilling story that kept me on the edge of my seat. The author did a great job of describing the nightmare of living with a psycho neighbor and the lengths they went to in order to survive. The addition of the dramatic ending only added to the suspense and made me realize how important it is to do a thorough background check on potential neighbors and roommates. Overall, it's a cautionary tale that serves as a reminder to always trust your instincts and take precautions to protect yourself. The next story is titled, The Neighbor Who Tried to Claim My Home and Pool as Her Own. About 3 years ago, I moved into my dream home on the beach. It was in an area where people only vacation for the summer, but I decided to live there year-round. My job allowed me to work remotely, so it was perfect. My house was one of the nicest on the strip, located right on the beach. I worked hard to keep it looking pristine, from the well-landscaped garden to the clean and beautiful pool. It was not uncommon for people to stop and admire my home as they walked down the beach. I had a slight aversion to driving due to my anxiety disorder, so I opted to ride my bike everywhere. The weather was always pleasant, and stores and restaurants were nearby, so it made sense. But it also meant that I never had a car parked outside to signal that someone lived there. One day I had gone out for lunch with some friends and stopped by the store on the way back home. When I arrived, I noticed several cars parked outside my house and even one in the driveway. I found it strange, but with the summer season, it wasn't unusual for people to visit the beach. So I let it slide. As I walked towards my home, I could hear laughter and splashing coming from the backyard. My mind was racing, and I couldn't imagine what I was about to walk into. I came around the corner and saw 5 adults sitting at my patio table and 3 kids splashing and playing in my pool. The adults were having a good time, drinking and eating, and even attempting to use my propane grill. When one woman asked if I had towels, I finally spoke up and asked them who they were and why they were on my property. The main woman, who I will refer to as TB, took off her sunglasses and looked at me with a smirk on her face. She said, "Who are you?" as her friends looked at me like I was interrupting their fun. "I'm the owner of this house," I replied. TB laughed and said, "Sweetheart, you must be confused. Your Airbnb is probably next door." Her friends chimed in, telling me to leave them alone and congratulating her on her new house. It was clear that TB had lied to her friends, claiming my home as her own. She even joked that her ex-husband paid for the house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman was lying to her friends, and they believed her. I knew I had to do something about it, but I didn't want to escalate the situation. So I decided to pretend that I was mistaken and walked away. But as soon as they were out of sight, I locked the gate from the outside, trapping them inside my property. I then called a towing company and had their cars removed from the front of my house. When the police arrived, TB was frantically trying to climb over the gate to escape. It was a sight to see, and even the police officers couldn't help but chuckle at her foolishness. They arrested her for trespassing and disorderly conduct. After the incident, TB tried to make amends, but I wanted nothing to do with her. I decided to press charges, and she was fined for her actions. I also made it clear to her that if she ever set foot on my property again, she would be in big trouble. Months passed, and things went back to normal. TB kept her distance, and I was able to enjoy my home without any unwanted guests. However, I began to notice a pattern. TB would drive by my house slowly, and I couldn't believe that TB was still lurking around my home. It was as if she couldn't let go of her obsession with my property. I started to feel uneasy and decided to take some precautions. I installed a security camera system and made sure to always lock my gate. But one day I received a call from my neighbor. She told me that TB had been talking about me again, claiming that my home was hers and that I had stolen it from her. My neighbor tried to reason with her, but TB wouldn't listen. I knew I had to do something about this. I contacted a lawyer and decided to take legal action against TB. The lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter warning her to stop making false claims about my home, but TB wouldn't back down. It all came to a head one afternoon when I came home to find TB on my property again. This time she had brought a group of people with her and they were trying to break into my home. I was terrified and called the police immediately. The police arrived quickly and arrested TB and her accomplices. It turned out that TB had convinced these people to help her take over my home. She had even provided them with fake documents to prove that the home was hers. I was in shock. How could someone be so obsessed with a property that didn't belong to them? TB was charged with multiple offenses, including fraud and trespassing. She was sentenced to jail time and had to pay me compensation for the damages caused to my home. After that incident, I never heard from TB again. I sold my home and moved to a new location where I could live without any worries. It was a tough lesson to learn, but I realized that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself and protect what is rightfully yours. In my opinion, this story was both entertaining and a bit alarming. It's hard to imagine someone being so obsessed with a property that they would go to such great lengths to try and claim it as their own. However, I do commend the homeowner for standing up for themselves and taking legal action against the neighbor. It's important to protect what is rightfully yours, and I think this story serves as a reminder to always be vigilant and aware of your surroundings. Overall, it was a thrilling read and definitely kept me on the edge of my seat. The next story is titled, "Accidentally Burned Down My Neighbor's Fence and Got Sued for $10K, but Justice Was Served." I was living in a small town in the countryside, working as a mechanic at a local car repair shop. I had always been fascinated by fireworks and had grown up using them with my family during 4th of July celebrations. However, my fascination turned into a nightmare when I accidentally burned down my neighbor's fence and caused extensive damage to her yard. It all happened on a warm summer evening. I had just gotten off work and was looking forward to a relaxing evening at home. My neighbor had gone out of town for the weekend and had asked me to keep an eye on her house while she was away. I decided to invite a few friends over for a small barbecue in her backyard. We had brought some fireworks with us to light up later in the evening. As the sun started to set, we lit up some sparklers and watched as they illuminated the sky. It was a beautiful sight. However, things quickly took a turn for the worse when one of my friends accidentally lit a bottle rocket that flew over the fence and landed in my neighbor's backyard. We heard a loud bang and saw the fire spreading rapidly. We quickly realized what had happened and tried to put out the fire with a garden hose. But it was no use. The fire was spreading too fast. I called the fire department and they arrived in a matter of minutes. They were able to put out the fire before it caused any further damage to neighboring houses. However, my neighbor's fence had been completely destroyed, and her yard was now a charred mess. I was devastated by what had happened and knew that I had to take responsibility for my actions. The next morning, I went over to my neighbor's house to apologize and see if there was anything I could do to help. She was understandably upset and demanded that I pay her $10,000 to cover the cost of the damages. I was taken aback by her demand and didn't know how to respond. I knew that I couldn't afford to pay her that much money and started to panic. I decided to seek legal advice and hired a lawyer who specialized in property damage cases. He advised me to get an estimate for the damage and to negotiate with my neighbor. I followed his advice and got an estimate from a reputable contractor. The estimate came out to be $3,500, which was still a lot of money, but a lot less than what my neighbor was asking for. I presented her with the estimate and offered to pay her that amount. She refused and threatened to take me to court. After a few weeks, I received a notice from the court that my neighbor had filed a lawsuit against me for $10,000. I was devastated and didn't know what to do. I went back to my lawyer, who assured me that we had a strong case. He advised me to gather any evidence that could help my case, such as photos of the damage, the estimate, and any communication with my neighbor. On the day of the court hearing, my neighbor was confident that she would win the case. She had brought her own lawyer and a pile of documents to support her claim. However, as soon as the judge saw the evidence that we had gathered, he was not impressed with her claim. He asked her why she was asking for such a high amount and whether she had any proof to support her claim. She stuttered and fumbled for words, but couldn't provide any convincing evidence. The judge then turned to me and asked me to present my case. I calmly presented my evidence and explained my side of the story. After hearing both sides, the judge took a few minutes to deliberate. When he returned, he made a dramatic announcement. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to say this, but you are out of line. The evidence presented by the defendant shows that he is only responsible for the cost of the fence, which is $1,200. And considering the fact that the plaintiff's yard was in poor condition even before the fire, there is no justification for the additional $8,800 that you are asking for." My neighbor was shocked by the verdict and started to argue with the judge. However, the judge was firm in his decision and ordered her to pay my legal fees. I felt relieved and grateful that justice had been served. I didn't want to ruin my relationship with my neighbor, but her actions had left a bitter taste in my mouth. I decided to keep my distance from her and move on with my life. Months went by, and I had almost forgotten about the incident. However, one day I received a call from my lawyer. He told me that my neighbor had filed another lawsuit against me for defamation. She claimed that I had spread false rumors about her on social media and had caused her emotional distress. I was shocked by her accusations and knew that they were baseless. I had never spoken ill of her to anyone, let alone on social media. My lawyer advised me to gather any evidence that could prove my innocence. I spent hours combing through my social media accounts and found nothing that could support her claims. I even reached out to my friends and family members to see if they had heard anything about me spreading rumors. They all denied having any knowledge of such rumors. The day of the court hearing arrived, and my neighbor was once again confident that she would win the case. She had brought her own lawyer and a stack of papers to support her claim. However, this time I was ready for her. I had brought all the evidence that I had gathered, including screenshots of my social media accounts and witness statements. When the judge asked her to present her evidence, she struggled to come up with anything substantial. She stuttered and fumbled, trying to make her case. However, it was evident that she had no proof to support her claims. I presented my evidence and explained that I had never spoken ill of her to anyone, let alone on social media. After hearing both sides, the judge took a few minutes to deliberate. When he returned, he made another dramatic announcement. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to say this, but your claims are baseless. The evidence presented by the defendant shows that he has never spoken ill of you on social media or otherwise. You have wasted the court's time and resources by filing this frivolous lawsuit. I hereby order you to pay the defendant's legal fees and to refrain from filing any further lawsuits against him." My neighbor was once again shocked by the verdict and stormed out of the courtroom. I felt relieved and grateful that justice had been served once again. I realized that I had learned a valuable lesson from this incident. I had to be careful with the fireworks and take responsibility for my actions. I also learned that I had to stand up for myself and fight for what was right. In the end, my neighbor moved away from the town and I never saw her again. I learned that forgiveness is key to moving on, and that holding grudges only leads to more pain and suffering. I am grateful for the support of my friends and family during this difficult time and for the justice that was served. In my opinion, this story was a roller coaster ride of emotions. I couldn't believe the nerve of the neighbor trying to milk the defendant for such a large sum of money. It was satisfying to see the judge put her in her place and rule in favor of the defendant. The twist ending with the second lawsuit was unexpected, but it was great to see the defendant stand up for himself and prove his innocence. Overall, it was a well-written story that kept me engaged from beginning to end. The last story is titled, Revenge at the Wedding. My wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had finally found the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and I was ready to make that commitment. However, my younger brother Todd had other plans. Todd had always been the favorite child in our family. He was born with complications and had to stay in the ICU for a month, so my parents doted on him and gave him everything he wanted. As a result, he grew up thinking the world revolved around him. He always made himself the center of attention at family events and never cared about anyone else's feelings. When I proposed to my girlfriend Michelle, I wanted to elope, but she insisted that we have a small wedding and invite our families. I agreed, even though I knew that Todd might ruin the day. Sure enough, during Michelle's father-daughter dance, Todd proposed to his girlfriend Lucy. It was a selfish move that ruined the moment for Michelle and her father, and I knew I had to do something to get back at Todd. After the wedding, I talked to my best man Jim, and we came up with a plan. We hired a woman to pretend to be Todd's side piece. She cornered Todd and Lucy at a restaurant and claimed that she was pregnant with his baby. Todd denied it, but the woman had his phone number, and I had messed with his phone to incriminate him. Lucy threw the ring back at Todd and left in tears. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that I had gotten back at Todd, but I also felt guilty for what I had done. I had stooped to his level, and I wasn't proud of it. However, I couldn't bring myself to apologize to Todd, even though he was my brother. A few months after the wedding, Todd and Lucy broke up. It turned out that Todd had cheated on her with multiple women, and Lucy couldn't forgive him. Todd blamed me for their breakup and refused to speak to me or Michelle. My parents tried to mediate, but they were also upset with me for ruining Todd's proposal. I regretted what I had done, but I also knew that Todd had brought it upon himself. He had always put himself first and never cared about anyone else's feelings. I had finally stood up to him, and I had no regrets. Update. A few years later, I received a call from Todd's ex-girlfriend, Lucy. She had met someone new and was getting married. She wanted me to be her wedding planner. At first, I was hesitant to take the job, but Lucy assured me that Todd wouldn't be there, and it would be a fresh start for all of us. I agreed to be her wedding planner, and I worked hard to make her wedding day perfect. When the day finally arrived, everything went smoothly, and Lucy was happy. However, as I was packing up my things, I saw Todd walk into the venue. I froze. I didn't know what to do. Todd looked at me with anger in his eyes, and I knew that he was there to confront me. I tried to avoid him, but he cornered me and started yelling at me. He blamed me for ruining his life and causing him to lose Lucy. I tried to explain that it was his own fault, but he wouldn't listen. The argument escalated, and before I knew it, Todd had punched me in the face. I fell to the ground and he continued to kick me. It took several people to pull him off me, and by the time they did, I was bleeding and bruised. I filed a police report and pressed charges against Todd. He was arrested and charged with assault. It was a shock to our family, but at the same time it was a relief to know that he was finally facing the consequences of his actions. During the trial, Todd pleaded guilty and was sentenced to community service and anger management classes. He apologized to me and Lucy, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive him. Our relationship was forever strained, and I knew that it would never be the same again. After the trial, I received a call from my parents. They apologized for not seeing things from my perspective and for always favoring Todd. They realized that they had enabled his behavior and that it was time for him to take responsibility for his actions. It was a small victory, but it meant a lot to me. As for me and Michelle, we continued to live our lives and build a future together. We learned from our experiences and made sure to always communicate and work through our problems together. We had our ups and downs, but we never lost sight of what was important, our love for each other. Looking back on it now, I realized that revenge was not the answer. It only caused more pain and hurt for everyone involved. I regret what I did to Todd and Lucy, but I also know that it was a learning experience. I learned that sometimes it's better to let go of the past and focus on the present and the future. Life is too short to hold grudges and seek revenge. Instead, we should focus on forgiveness, understanding, and love. In my opinion, Revenge at the Wedding is a compelling story that shows how family dynamics and unresolved issues can lead to dramatic consequences. While seeking revenge may seem satisfying in the moment, it often only leads to more hurt and pain. I think it's important to communicate with our loved ones and work through our problems together, rather than resorting to drastic measures. Overall, the story is a good reminder to prioritize forgiveness, understanding, and love in our relationships. The next one is an entitled People Story. I never thought I'd be the cause of such a significant loss for anyone. But alas, my story begins with my neighbors and their peculiar love for cars, and ends with a costly mistake that they'll never forget. For as long as I can remember, the Johnsons have lived next door to my family. They are a relatively wealthy family with a penchant for collecting cars. It's quite a sight to see their 9 vehicles parked all over the street. They always park at least 2 of those cars directly in front of my house, which has been a persistent annoyance for my family and me. According to the local regulations, cars can't be parked in the same spot for more than 48 hours. However, the Johnsons never seem to care about that rule. What's even more peculiar is that their large driveway, which can easily accommodate 4 cars, remains empty. They once told me that they think parked cars in driveways look tacky, and they prefer the unobstructed view of their manicured lawn. To me, it seemed like a strange preference, considering they barely used half of their 9 cars. In 2021, I noticed that they were building a second unit behind their main house. The construction was incredibly fast, taking just under a month to complete. This struck me as odd, as it usually takes 2-3 months for such projects, especially considering the lengthy city inspection process. Suspecting that something wasn't right, I decided to submit a ticket through the city's app, reporting a possible illegal residential building without permits. I didn't think much of it at the time and almost forgot about the incident until a year later when I witnessed my neighbors tearing down the second unit. Word quickly spread around our block that a city inspector had visited the Johnsons and ordered the demolition of the unpermitted building. Based on the materials and labor that went into the second unit, I estimate that my report cost them over $100,000. As I watched the demolition unfold, I felt a mix of emotions: guilt for causing such a significant loss to my neighbors, but also vindication for standing up against their blatant disregard for the rules. It wasn't long before the Johnsons found out that I was the one who had reported them. I could feel the tension between our families rise, and every encounter became a battle of icy glares and terse exchanges. One day, as I returned home from work, I found that all 4 of their cars were parked in front of my house, leaving no room for me to park. It was a clear message from the Johnsons. They were out for revenge. I knew I had to put an end to this feud before it escalated any further. Gathering my courage, I approached the Johnsons and offered a sincere apology for the financial loss they had suffered. To my surprise, they seemed to appreciate my honesty and were willing to discuss a truce. We agreed to be more considerate of each other's needs and to communicate more openly in the future. They promised to limit their car parking in front of our house and even offered to help with the landscaping of our yard as a gesture of goodwill. The feud may have cost my neighbors over $100,000, but in the end it taught us all a valuable lesson about the importance of communication and respect for one another. The next story is titled Smug Entitled Karen Tries to Steal My Home and Calls Cops on Us for Breaking into Her House. We evicted her. Growing up, my wife and I always dreamt of having a big family. It was the reason why we purchased a large house a few years ago. However, life had different plans, and we found out that I was infertile. The dream of having our own children seemed to be slipping away, and we were left with an empty big house. The silence in the house was deafening, and we decided it was time to fill it with some life. As an alternative, we started hosting friends and acquaintances who needed temporary shelter. This way, we were able to help others and have some company. We soon decided to rent out one of our 4 bedrooms to a more permanent tenant. My wife posted about the available room on the neighborhood's Facebook page, and we informed a few neighbors, hoping someone would be interested. A few days later, a young woman named Karen, who was 23 years old and had a seemingly charming personality, showed up at our door. She explained that she was working from home due to the pandemic and needed a quiet place because her parents were too noisy. Without giving it much thought, we agreed to let her stay, relieved that we had found someone. I showed Karen around the house, informed her about the house rules, and allowed her to choose her bedroom. She picked the most spacious room with the best lighting and the nicest bathroom. She mentioned that her job required her to be on video calls frequently, so the room suited her needs perfectly. Things started going downhill soon after she moved in. Karen would take food from our fridge without asking, and she would even drink from my cup. Her loud music would keep me awake at night, and she would throw parties with complete strangers in her room. Her entitlement and disrespect for our home was becoming unbearable. Months passed, and Karen's behavior never improved. She continued to be a nuisance, not paying rent for 4 months and constantly taking advantage of our hospitality. After discussing it with my wife, we decided it was time for Karen to go. Over breakfast one morning, we broke the news to Karen, asking her to leave our home. She became furious and threatened us, saying we would regret this decision. Moments later, the police arrived, summoned by Karen, who falsely accused us of breaking into her house. Fortunately, we were able to prove our ownership of the house, and the police told Karen to leave immediately. Karen packed her things and left, and we began the arduous process of cleaning and repairing the room she had damaged. After days of hard work, we were finally able to restore our home. A week later, as my wife and I were watching a movie in the living room, we heard a loud crash. A car had driven right into our living room, barely missing us. The driver was none other than Karen, intoxicated and seeking revenge. She slurred, "I told you that you're going to regret it." I was in shock and disbelief. I called the police, who arrived quickly and arrested Karen for driving under the influence, driving without a license, and endangering our lives. It was only after her arrest that we felt truly safe in our own home. The ordeal with Karen left a lasting impact on us, but we learned a valuable lesson about the importance of setting boundaries and protecting our home. The next story is titled, "My Revenge on My Cheating Ex-Husband with the Help of His Own Mistake." It was a sunny afternoon when I received a call from my attorney. "We won!" he said with excitement in his voice. "Your ex-husband's company is filing for bankruptcy, and he's lost everything." I couldn't help but smile to myself. After what he had put me through, he deserved every bit of it. My ex-husband had cheated on me with his coworker, and after discovering the affair, I had filed for divorce. During the proceedings, he had made some grave mistakes that I had used to my advantage, one of which was his involvement in a major embezzlement scheme at his company. I had used that information to force him to pay me a substantial alimony and child support, which had caused him a lot of financial trouble. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted revenge for all the pain and heartache he had caused me. So, I had come up with a plan with the help of my attorney. We had started an investigation and found out that his new girlfriend was a nurse at a local hospital, and they were having an affair. My attorney told me that we could report her to the State Board of Nursing and get her license suspended, and that's exactly what we did. We waited until the divorce was finalized, and I made sure to have a clause in the settlement that I wouldn't say anything negative about their relationship. But his attorney made the same mistake my ex-husband did. They didn't ask if I had already filed charges against her. When the Board of Nursing responded to my complaint, I told them that it would take a subpoena to get me to testify, and they were happy to oblige. They suspended her license, and she lost her job. My ex-husband was furious and tried to blame me for ruining their lives, but I didn't care. I had won. A few years later, I received an unexpected update from my attorney. He told me that my ex-husband had hit rock bottom and his girlfriend had left him. He had nothing left, and it was all because of his own mistakes. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, and I had come out on top. But it wasn't until a few years after that, when I received a letter from his ex-girlfriend, that I realized the extent of my revenge. She had sent me a copy of a hotel receipt from the night they had spent together, just like I had done with her. It was clear that she had been hurt by him just as much as I had, and my actions had inadvertently helped her in her own divorce proceedings. I couldn't help but smile to myself as I read the letter. My revenge had not only punished my ex-husband, but had helped another innocent victim. It was a satisfying feeling, knowing that justice had been served in the end. The next story is titled, Old Man Parks His Car in the Middle of the Road. Somehow, I'm at fault? It all started on a sunny Saturday morning. I had just gotten off the phone with my best friend, who had invited me to join her at the newly opened cafe down the street. The place was located in a strip mall, which was usually bustling with people on weekends. I was excited to try their famous cinnamon rolls and catch up with my friend. As I approached the strip mall, I noticed a long line of cars waiting to enter the parking lot. I joined the queue, patiently waiting for my turn to park. Finally, I managed to get in, and I was eager to find a spot and meet my friend. Driving through the parking lot, I noticed an old white man in the car in front of me suddenly stop right in the middle of the lane. He turned off his car, got out, and leisurely strolled towards the nearest store as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't believe my eyes. He had essentially parked his car in the middle of the lane, blocking anyone from passing through. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. The narrow gap between his car and the other parked vehicles seemed too risky to squeeze through. After a moment, I decided to honk lightly, hoping to catch his attention. He turned around and I rolled down my window. "Excuse me, sir," I said as politely as I could. "That's not a parking space. I can't get around you." He raised his hand, motioning for me to pass through the tight space he had left. Clearly, he had done this before and saw no issue with his actions. I tried to reason with him, repeating that I couldn't get around and that he needed to move his car. The man refused to listen and began to get aggressive, stepping closer to my car and challenging me. Desperate to defuse the situation, I tried a different approach, one I had seen on the internet. "Sir, are you okay? Do you know where you are?" I asked, feigning concern. "Is there someone who's supposed to be helping you today?" His expression shifted from anger to confusion, but it didn't last long. He quickly returned to his aggressive demeanor, mocking my questions and asking if I needed help myself. I kept up my act, telling him that I'd call an ambulance and that everything would be okay. In the meantime, a parking space had opened up behind me, so I backed up and pretended to dial cops. The old man seemed to finally realize that he couldn't intimidate me, and he reluctantly returned to his car, muttering under his breath. He started the engine and drove away, disappearing into the maze of the parking lot. With my heart still pounding, I parked my car and met up with my friend. Over cinnamon rolls and coffee, I recounted the bizarre encounter, and we shared a laugh. As we left the cafe, I noticed the old man's car parked perfectly in a spot on the other side of the lot. I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. He had learned his lesson, at least for today. The next story is titled, X Left Me for a Good Friend, so now I'm going to meet and work for their favorite artist. I was with my partner Sam for the better part of a decade. We had built a life together, and I couldn't imagine a future without them. It was during those early years that we met Alex, a charismatic and fun-loving friend who quickly became a close confidant to both of us. For a long time, our friendship was rock solid, and we were inseparable. Sam and I had always been passionate about music, and our love for it was a significant part of our relationship. We spent countless nights dancing and singing along to our favorite tunes. And as I grew older, I found my true calling in the music industry. My career as a videographer and photographer in the touring music world began to take off, and I was fortunate enough to work with some renowned artists. However, this meant I had to spend long hours away from home, which strained my relationship with Sam. As I worked harder to provide for us, I noticed Sam and Alex growing closer, their bond seemingly deepening by the day. The change in their dynamic made me increasingly uncomfortable, and I started to feel left out. They eventually confronted me about the idea of a polyamorous relationship, which I couldn't wrap my head around. When I refused, Sam chose Alex over me, shattering my heart in the process. The fallout was brutal. Sam tried to turn our mutual friends against me, causing deep emotional scars that I still struggle with. I learned that Sam had been using my hard-earned money to finance parties and treat Alex to expensive gifts, all the while publicly disparaging me on social media. My mental health took a nosedive, and I lost my business, my sanity, and nearly my will to live. During this dark period, I realized that living well was the best revenge I could have. I decided to focus on my own happiness and success, turning my pain into motivation. I remembered Sam and Alex's shared adoration for a famous DJ, whose music they bonded over and traveled to see. In fact, they had recently attended one of the DJ's concerts. This was the catalyst for my plan. Using my connections in the music industry, I reached out to the DJ's team. offering my services as a videographer, photographer, and social media manager. They were impressed with my work and offered me a well-paying position on the DJ's tour, which would give me the opportunity to travel, create content, and manage fan meetups. As I embark on this new journey, I can't help but think of Sam and Alex. They'll undoubtedly see my work all over the DJ's social media, and I'll be sure to post plenty of selfies to remind them of what they lost. Although my initial motivation was driven by spite, I now find myself genuinely excited to chase my dreams, reconnect with my creative side, and meet incredible new people along the way. The next story is titled, "My Mother Thinks She's Entitled to One of My Properties." Growing up, my life at home was far from perfect. My parents were constantly arguing, and I often felt like I was caught in the crossfire. When I was 16, things took a turn for the worse, and I found myself involved in a legal battle that left me estranged from my family. I walked away from that courtroom, vowing never to speak to my mother again. 19 long years have passed since then. I've built a successful career for myself and invested wisely in real estate. Life was good, and I thought I had finally put the past behind me. That is, until one day, I received an unexpected email at work. The message was from my mother, whom I hadn't heard from since that fateful day in court. She had hired a private investigator to track me down, and she was now reaching out to me, demanding one of my properties as compensation for the past. She insisted that I owed her and my father an apology for what I had put them through all those years ago. They had suffered financially, she claimed, and one of my most expensive properties would be the perfect way to make amends. The audacity of her message left me reeling. I couldn't believe that after all this time, she still felt entitled to anything from me. Instead of giving in to her ridiculous demands, I contacted my lawyer and had him send her a formal letter of no contact, threatening a restraining order if she continued to harass me. But my mother was not one to back down easily. She sent a follow-up email, doubling down on her demands, and even suggesting that the property she desired could be the key to healing our fractured relationship. Her words, dripping with insincerity, only fueled my resolve. Determined to put an end to her harassment, I hatched a plan. I arranged a meeting, ostensibly to hand over the keys to the property she coveted. I knew she would be unable to resist the temptation of what she believed to be her rightful prize. The day of the meeting, I arrived early and hid in a discreet location nearby. As my mother approached the property, I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as she reached for the door, the police swooped in, arresting her for violating the no-contact order and attempted extortion. As she was led away in handcuffs, our eyes met for the first time in almost 2 decades. I could see the confusion and fury in her gaze, but instead of feeling satisfaction, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. My mother had finally received the consequences of her actions, and I could now move on with my life, free from her toxic influence. Update: it's been 6 months since that dramatic confrontation, and I've been granted a permanent restraining order against my mother. My father, whom I've reconnected with, has since apologized for his part in the past and expressed regret for not standing up to my mother sooner. Though we will never have the close relationship I once longed for, we have started the long journey of rebuilding our bond, taking it one step at a time. As for my mother, she is facing criminal charges and awaiting trial. The knowledge that she is finally being held accountable for her actions has brought me a sense of closure I never thought possible. The next story is titled, Sorry, entitled Mom, Dad, and Younger Brother. I refuse to play happy family, and no contact means no contact. I, 26F, moved out in late December 2021, and for my emotional health, I cut off contact with my family. For context, I cut off my parents because they turned into religious fanatics and tried to push their beliefs onto me. The last straw was when they caused an emotional event where they tried to throw out some stuff that my late older brother left me to remember him by, anime graphic tees and a Polaroid photo album of the good times we had together. Their excuse was, "That is diabolical," or, "It's time to let the dead be dead." Mind you, this was their eldest son we are talking about, and they acted as if he was the worst person on earth. He wasn't. I even cut off my younger brother, 22M, because he became verbally and emotionally abusive. The only one I had contact with was my sister-in-law, 28F, for the sake of my nephew, and she begged me to get help because she saw that I looked affected. I took her advice and decided to attend therapy. In a few sessions, I noticed how toxic my family was and ignored all the red flags. Everything was going great until I got a WhatsApp notification from a group that my parents and younger brother created. They told me that 5 months of no contact were enough, and that I had a lot to do to reconcile with the family and try to keep the peace. I read the message many times and answered back by saying that, while I love them and there is no hate in my heart, I can't go back in contact with the people that damaged my emotional health for them to feel better about themselves. I am not willing to play happy family, and my emotional health is much more important than anything. Before any of them could reply, I got out of the group chat and blocked their numbers. My friends, family, my mom's coworkers, and my boyfriend, 28M, have said that I am brave for doing this, and I should always put myself first and not let anyone walk all over me. I guess it is good to finally feel free. The last story is titled The Fierce Competition for the Best Parking Spot. It was a busy weekday afternoon, and I had to run errands before picking up my daughter from school. I drove to the mall, hoping to find a parking spot near the entrance, but as I got closer, I realized that it was going to be tough. The parking lot was packed with cars, and people were circling around, looking for spaces like vultures. I was about to give up when I saw a small sedan backing out of a spot near the entrance. My heart leaped with joy, and I quickly signaled to the driver that I was taking the spot. She acknowledged my signal and drove away, leaving me to park. As I was about to back into the spot, another car zoomed in from the opposite direction and tried to claim the spot. I honked my horn, hoping to scare the other driver off, but they kept coming closer and closer. My heart started racing as I realized that this was going to be a fierce competition for the best parking spot. I rolled down my window and shouted at the other driver, telling them that I had signaled first and that the spot was mine. The other driver sneered and gave me the finger, then kept inching closer. I could see the anger in their eyes, and I knew that they were not going to back down. Just as I was about to give up, another car drove up from behind me and honked its horn. The driver got out and walked over to me, telling me that they had been waiting for this spot for over half an hour. I explained my situation, but the other driver just scoffed and called me a liar. I could feel my blood boiling as the three of us stood there, each refusing to give an inch. Suddenly, a security guard appeared out of nowhere and asked us what was going on. We explained the situation, and he told us that he would have to call the police if we couldn't resolve it peacefully. We all took a deep breath and decided to hold a vote. We asked people who were walking by to vote for who they thought deserved the spot, and after several minutes of intense campaigning, I won the vote by a narrow margin. As I pulled into the spot, I could feel the other driver's resentment burning into me, but I didn't care. I had won the competition fair and square. Update. A few weeks later, I received a call from the mall security office. They had reviewed the footage from the parking lot cameras and noticed that the other driver had keyed my car in retaliation for losing the vote. I was devastated. I had just spent a fortune on fixing my car, and now it had been damaged again. I filed a police report and pressed charges against the other driver, but the damage had already been done. After a long and drawn-out legal battle, the other driver was found guilty and forced to pay for the damages. But I was left with a lingering sense of bitterness and mistrust. I had never thought that a simple parking spot could cause so much trouble and heartache. From that day forward, I made a vow to always be vigilant and cautious in the parking lot, and to never underestimate the lengths that people would go to get the best spot. The next one is an entitled People Story. Over 2 decades ago, my family and I lived in a peaceful suburban neighborhood just outside Chicago, known for its unique 3-flat apartment buildings. My parents, always thinking ahead, had invested in 2 of these buildings. We occupied 2 units while renting out the remaining 4 to tenants. The buildings were situated on a large plot of land, which was considered a luxury in the area. As a result, we had ample parking space for 16 cars, making it a perfect living situation for both our family and our tenants. For many years, things ran smoothly in our little community. Our tenants were respectful, and we never had any issues with parking or property boundaries. However, our peaceful life was disrupted when new neighbors moved in a few buildings down. They purchased a single unit and soon began causing trouble. We started noticing unfamiliar cars occupying our parking spaces, and I even caught one of the new neighbors driving through our bushes and across the yard to exit the property. Outraged by their brazen disregard for our property, I contacted the police, but their hands were tied. Determined to put an end to the unauthorized parking, I contacted a tow company, which promptly installed signs warning that unauthorized vehicles would be towed. The signs seemed to do the trick, and the random cars stopped appearing on our lot. However, our victory was short-lived. On New Year's Eve, as the neighborhood prepared for a night of celebrations, I returned home to find our parking lot completely overrun with cars. To make matters worse, some vehicles were parked on the street, effectively blocking our tenants' cars from leaving. Furious, I called the tow company, only to learn they were swamped with calls and couldn't come for several hours. Meanwhile, the temperature outside was well below freezing, turning the streets into a winter wonderland. As I stood there, shivering in the cold, an idea struck me. I decided to teach the trespassers a lesson they'd never forget. I gathered our lawn sprinklers and hoses and connected one to the laundry room faucet, using hot water to prevent the equipment from freezing up. Then I embarked on a mission to cover every inch of the parking lot, the street, and the offending cars in a thick layer of ice. I was particularly diligent about targeting the locks, window seals, and grills of the cars. After 5 hours of meticulously spraying the area with water, I put away the equipment and retired to bed, anxiously awaiting the morning's events. At 4 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of furious pounding on our door and the relentless ringing of our doorbell. Grinning, I called the police and waited for them to arrive, sipping my coffee as I watched the chaos unfold from my window. When the officers arrived, they struggled to suppress their laughter at the icy spectacle before them. The partygoers, it seemed, had been directed to park on our property by their friend, the same inconsiderate neighbor who had driven through our bushes. I pointed to the tow sign and informed the irate crowd that they had two options: move their cars or face being towed. With my permission, the officers ticketed all the frozen vehicles, which were eventually towed since no one could gain access to their ice-encased cars. A few weeks later, my family and I received an unexpected visit from the neighborhood's Homeowners Association. They had caught wind of our frosty retribution and, to our surprise, wanted to recognize us for taking a stand against the ongoing parking issue in the community. They awarded us a certificate of appreciation and even vowed to implement new measures to prevent unauthorized parking in the area. Our actions had not only caught the attention of the neighborhood but also inspired change. However, this wasn't the end of our story. A couple of months after the icy incident, the inconsiderate neighbor decided to throw another party. This time, they were cautious not to park on our property, but they still took up most of the available street parking, leaving our tenants with no place to park. I decided that a more creative solution was needed to send a strong message. I enlisted the help of some of our tenants, who were eager to participate in teaching the neighbor a lesson. We constructed a makeshift barrier using traffic cones and caution tape, effectively boxing in the cars parked on the street. We then posted a large sign that read, "Respect your neighbor's parking rights." Additionally, I had made contact with the tow company ahead of time, ensuring their prompt assistance if needed. The next morning, we were once again awakened by furious pounding on our door and the incessant ringing of our doorbell. This time, however, we were prepared. As the police arrived, the officers couldn't help but chuckle at the sight of the boxed-in vehicles. The irate partygoers were left with no choice but to call a tow truck to move their cars, which they did at their own expense. In the days that followed, we received numerous messages of support and gratitude from our tenants and other neighbors who had grown weary of the inconsiderate neighbors' antics. The Homeowners Association followed through on their promise, implementing new parking regulations and even increasing the fines for unauthorized parking. The inconsiderate neighbor, now notorious for their parking blunders, eventually decided to move out, selling their unit to a more considerate family. From that point forward, our little community returned to its peaceful state, with residents respecting each other's parking rights. While I didn't capture any video evidence of the dramatic events that transpired during those unforgettable months, the memories remain etched in my mind as a testament to standing up for one's property and teaching inconsiderate neighbors a lesson they'll never forget. Moreover, it proved the power of community action and unity in resolving conflicts and fostering a harmonious living environment for all. In my opinion, this story was quite the roller coaster. It's fascinating to see how the narrator came up with creative solutions to protect their property and parking rights. It just goes to show that sometimes thinking outside the box can bring about change, not only for one person, but for an entire community. While the methods were a bit unconventional, it's heartening to see that in the end, the neighborhood came together to support each other and enforce more considerate behavior. It's a great reminder that we all have a role to play in maintaining a harmonious living environment. The next story is titled, "HOA Forced Me to Pay HOA Fees." Although I'm not part of the HOA, I sued them for $154,000. Life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect it. For me, one of the most significant lessons I've learned in recent years is that standing up for myself and fighting for justice can be worth the struggle, even when it seems impossible. This is the story of how I took on a corrupt homeowners association, HOA, and emerged victorious, changing the lives of my neighbors and myself for the better. About 18 years ago, I decided to move to Plaza del Sol, a picturesque community nestled in a quiet corner of the city. I was drawn to the area's charm and the promise of a peaceful, friendly neighborhood. Little did I know that my life would be forever changed by the events that unfolded in this seemingly idyllic location. The community of Plaza del Sol was divided into two distinct sections. The first section, where I purchased a lovely older home, was built several years before the newer, more upscale second section. Upon closing the deal on my house, I received a packet of HOA documents and was informed that I was part of the association. At the time, I thought nothing of it and accepted the responsibility without question. For a decade, I paid my HOA fees diligently, which amounted to a staggering $400 per month. The association wasn't overly strict, and I had no reason to suspect anything was amiss. That is, until one fateful day when I received a peculiar letter from the HOA. The letter requested that all homeowners in Section 1 sign updated legal documents. It was cryptic and vague, which immediately aroused my suspicion. As I reviewed the new documents, I made a shocking discovery. The homes in Section 1 were never meant to be part of the HOA. It seemed that the association had been dishonestly collecting fees from us for years, under the pretense of authority they never possessed. This realization sparked a fire within me, and I decided that I could no longer sit idly by while the HOA exploited my neighbors and me. I refused to sign the updated documents and stop paying my fees. I rallied my neighbors in Section 1, and together we began to resist the HOA's unjust demands. The HOA did not take our rebellion lightly. They threatened and harassed us, even going so far as to attempt to auction my house off in a short sale. It was at this point that I decided to take legal action against the association, despite the uphill battle that lay ahead. Finding a lawyer who was willing to take on an HOA case proved to be a significant challenge. Many attorneys I contacted were hesitant to get involved in such disputes, as they can be notoriously difficult to win. However, after a long search, I found a capable and determined attorney who was eager to bring justice to our situation. The legal battle was long, arduous, and emotionally draining. It took years for the case to finally reach the court, but I never lost sight of the goal: to expose the HOA's corruption and free my neighbors and myself from their grasp. When we finally faced off against the HOA in court, I was nervous but resolute. The HOA's lawyer was aggressive and attempted to discredit me, but my attorney presented a compelling case. He revealed that the association had misrepresented its authority over Section 1 and had been deceitfully collecting fees from us for years. The jury found the HOA guilty of negligent misrepresentation and awarded me a third of the fees I had paid over the years. But the battle was far from over. The HOA appealed the ruling, dragging the case on for another year and pushing it through various levels of the legal system. The emotional and financial toll on me and my fellow Section 1 neighbors was immense, but we remained steadfast in our pursuit of justice. Eventually, our case reached the Supreme Court, where the final showdown took place. The judge carefully considered the evidence presented by both sides, asking probing questions that cut to the heart of the matter. The HOA's lawyer continued to be aggressive, but it was clear that their case was unraveling. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. The Supreme Court upheld the original ruling and ordered the HOA to pay me over half of the fees I had paid them over the years. The total award amounted to $154,000. Though it didn't completely cover my legal expenses, it was a significant victory that sent a clear message to the corrupt association. With the ruling in our favor, the residents of Section 1 were finally free from the HOA's tyrannical grip. No longer burdened by their unjust fees and rules, we could once again enjoy the peaceful, friendly neighborhood we had originally sought. However, the story didn't end there. In a dramatic turn of events, our legal victory inspired other homeowners to investigate their own HOAs, uncovering a widespread pattern of corruption and exploitation. News of our case spread far and wide, prompting a wave of legal challenges against dishonest associations across the country. As a result, regulations and oversight for HOAs were strengthened, protecting homeowners from future abuses. Today, I continue to live in my beloved home in Plaza del Sol's Section 1, where the memory of our hard-fought battle serves as a constant reminder of the importance of standing up for what's right. In my yard stands a sign that reads, "HOAs suck," a testament to the perseverance and determination that brought justice to our community and sparked nationwide change. Together, my neighbors and I forged an unbreakable bond, and we remain vigilant, ensuring that no one else will suffer the same fate at the hands of a corrupt HOA. In my opinion, this story is a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity. It's inspiring to see how one person's determination to fight for justice not only changed their own life, but also sparked a movement that led to nationwide reforms. The story is a reminder that we should always question authority when it seems unfair and never be afraid to stand our ground. It's also a great example of the power of community and how, when people come together for a common cause, real change can happen. Overall, I found the story engaging and thought-provoking, and it definitely makes me think twice about the role of HOAs in our neighborhoods. The next story is titled, Dealing with a Gas Thief. Ever since I could remember, my family owned a charming beach house perched on a cliff in a small coastal town in Puerto Rico. The town was an idyllic blend of rich history, breathtaking landscapes, and diverse cultures. It was a sanctuary for artists, writers, and travelers alike, attracted by the exquisite culinary scene and vibrant arts community. Growing up, I spent many summers in that quaint beach house, surrounded by the lush greenery and mesmerizing turquoise waters. After completing my studies and working in the city for a few years, I decided to move back to my childhood home. I yearned for a slower pace of life, a chance to reconnect with nature, and the opportunity to nurture my own creativity. My beach house became my haven, a place where I could work remotely and escape the chaotic urban life. One major challenge of living in such a remote area was the frequent power outages during the rainy season. As a digital freelancer, a stable internet connection was essential. To ensure my work remained uninterrupted, I relied on a gasoline generator. It wasn't the most eco-friendly solution, but it allowed me to maintain a semblance of modern living in this beautiful, rustic setting. A few months after moving back, a new neighbor arrived in town. He lived a couple of houses down the cliffside path and had a vintage Chevy van from the 70s parked outside his home. The van was a work of art, adorned with vivid psychedelic patterns and gleaming chrome accents. Although I admired his taste in automobiles, my new neighbor, whom I'll call Rick, turned out to be anything but agreeable. One afternoon, I discovered that the gasoline container I kept outside for emergencies had been tampered with. I had seen Rick lurking around my property earlier that day, and I confronted him about the missing gasoline. He feigned ignorance, denying any involvement in the theft. I decided to let it slide, hoping it was a one-time occurrence. However, a week later, the same thing happened again. Frustration and anger bubbled inside me, but I knew that confronting Rick again would likely yield the same result. Instead, I devised a plan to teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. I emptied the gasoline container, refilled my generator, and topped off my car's tank. Then, I drove to the nearest gas station and filled the container with diesel fuel. I placed the container back in its usual spot outside my house and waited. A few nights later, the sound of a tow truck shattered the peaceful silence. Peering out my window, I saw the truck hoisting Rick's incapacitated van onto its bed. Rick's face contorted with rage as he hurled curses into the night air. I couldn't suppress a satisfied grin, watching him suffer the consequences of his actions. Word spread quickly about Rick's nefarious activities, and it became apparent that he had a long history of petty theft and dishonesty. The small community, once welcoming and trusting, now united against him. His actions had disturbed the peace and harmony that defined our town. The final straw came when the landlord evicted Rick due to multiple complaints from other tenants. As he packed his belongings and drove away, the community breathed a collective sigh of relief. With the gas thief gone, life in our picturesque town returned to normal. Months passed, and I continued to cherish the tranquil life in the coastal town. Although I still kept a container of gasoline outside, I added a lock for extra security. The dramatic incident with Rick had become a distant memory, a reminder that even in paradise there can be trouble. Update. Sometime later I learned that Rick had relocated to another part of the island. Unfortunately, his penchant for mischief followed him. Through the grapevine, I heard that he had been arrested for attempting to steal a boat from a local marina. It seemed that Rick was incapable of changing his ways. A year after the incident, a massive storm hit the coast, causing widespread damage and leaving many residents without power for weeks. The community rallied together, working tirelessly to repair the damage and help those in need. Amidst the chaos, I couldn't help but think about Rick and how his actions had inadvertently united our community. During the recovery efforts, I met a young couple who had recently moved into Rick's old house. They were kind, hardworking, and shared my love for the arts. In a twist of fate, the gas thief's departure had paved the way for new friendships and a renewed sense of unity in our close-knit town. As we rebuilt our lives after the storm, I realized that sometimes adversity can bring out the best in people. Our community had faced both the figurative and literal storms and emerged stronger than ever. The once troubled beach house down the path had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a testament to the power of a united community. As for Rick, I occasionally heard updates on his misadventures. He continued to drift from place to place, leaving a trail of anger and distrust in his wake. While it was disheartening to know that some people never change, I was grateful that our community had come together to rise above the darkness he had cast over our once peaceful town. In the end, the story of the gas thief became a pivotal moment in the history of our coastal community. It taught us the importance of unity and vigilance in the face of adversity, and ultimately it reminded us that together we could weather any storm. In my opinion, this story was a captivating read that showcased the strength and unity of a close-knit community. I enjoyed how the author depicted the beautiful coastal setting and the contrast between the idyllic surroundings and the gas thief's malicious actions. It's a great reminder that sometimes adversity can bring out the best in people, and I appreciate how the story ended on a hopeful note, highlighting the power of a united community. It goes to show that even in paradise, there can be bumps in the road, but those challenges often make us stronger in the end. The last story is titled, "Won't Call Me By My Name, You Get a New One." As someone born into an immigrant family, my parents always wanted me to stay connected to our roots. Hailing from a small Eastern European country, they were proud of their heritage and wanted me to carry that pride forward. With that in mind, they decided to give me a name that truly embodied our culture, Elisabetta. Although I've always cherished my unique name, I can't deny that it has caused me a great deal of frustration over the years. Growing up in the United States, I quickly realized that my name was a constant source of confusion for many people. Friends, teachers, and even some family members struggled to pronounce it correctly. As the years went by, I grew accustomed to the mispronunciations and the various nicknames people came up with, but one thing always bothered me. My own extended family couldn't seem to get my name right. Now, in my early 30s, I still find myself correcting people on a regular basis. Most of the time, they would call me Elizabeth, which wasn't even close to my actual name. It was during one of our annual Thanksgiving gatherings at my grandparents' house that I finally reached my breaking point. Each year, relatives from near and far would come together to celebrate Thanksgiving. The house would be filled with laughter, love, and delicious food. This year, though, my patience was wearing thin. My Uncle James, who had never been able to pronounce my name correctly, was the final straw. He persistently called me Elizabeth throughout the day, despite my multiple attempts to correct him. After the umpteenth time, I had enough. I confronted him, exasperated. "Uncle James, it's Elisabetta, not Elizabeth. Please try to remember that." He rolled his eyes and said dismissively, "What did I say? Why does it matter? I said it close enough." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I decided that if my name's pronunciation didn't matter to him, why should I make an effort with his? From that point forward, I would call him Jamboree. It was a ridiculous name, but it seemed fitting for the situation. At first, Uncle James found the whole thing amusing. He chuckled at his new nickname, thinking I would eventually drop it. However, as the day wore on and more family members began calling him Jamboree, he grew increasingly annoyed. The Thanksgiving feast was a lavish affair, with everyone gathered around a beautifully decorated table, sharing stories and jokes. As we enjoyed the meal, I could see Jamboree's frustration mounting. He tried to ignore the constant teasing, but it was evident that the nickname was getting under his skin. As dessert was being served, Uncle James could no longer contain his irritation. He slammed his fork down on the table, causing the silverware to clatter and everyone to fall silent. Standing up, he addressed the room with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "All right, I've had enough. I get it, Elisabetta. I didn't realize how much it bothered you. From now on, I promise I'll make an effort to get your name right," he conceded, his face flushed with frustration. Feeling a mix of relief and sympathy, I decided it was time to end the ordeal. "Thank you, Uncle James. I appreciate it," I replied sincerely. The next day, as we all pitched in to clean up the aftermath of the feast, I overheard Uncle James quietly practicing my name, repeating it under his breath. It seemed he was genuinely determined to get it right. Months went by, and to my delight, Uncle James consistently addressed me by my proper name. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to me. I could see that he was making a genuine effort to respect my identity, and it brought us closer as a family. As Thanksgiving approached again the following year, I was both excited and apprehensive. I hoped that the progress we had made would last, and that this year's gathering would be free of any name-related drama. To my surprise and relief, not only did Uncle James continue to call me Elizabetta, but other family members seemed to have taken notice of his efforts, and were making a conscious attempt to get my name right as well. However, just when I thought the day would pass without incident, a new issue arose. My cousin Amanda, who had recently married a man from a different cultural background, introduced her husband Kieran to the family. Throughout the evening, I noticed that some family members were struggling to pronounce Kieran's name, and it brought back memories of my own experiences. Determined to prevent another family member from experiencing the same frustration I had, I decided to take action. I proposed a toast during the meal, drawing everyone's attention. "Family," I began, "we come from a rich cultural heritage, and it's important that we respect and honor each other's names. As someone who has faced this challenge myself, I'd like to ask all of us to make an effort to get Kieran's name right, just as Uncle James has done with mine." Uncle James, sitting across the table, gave me a knowing smile, and everyone raised their glasses in agreement. It was a poignant moment that not only helped bring our family closer together, but also highlighted the importance of recognizing and respecting the diverse backgrounds that made our family unique. From that day on, our family gatherings became a celebration of not just togetherness, but of the rich tapestry of cultures that we all represented. Names were no longer a source of frustration or confusion, but a symbol of the love and respect we had for one another. And as for Uncle James and me, our bond only grew stronger with each passing year, as we both learned the power and significance of something as simple as getting a name right. In my opinion, this story is a great reminder of the importance of respecting each other's names and cultural backgrounds. It's easy to see how the protagonist's frustration with her family's inability to pronounce her name correctly led to some humorous and dramatic moments, but at the same time, the story beautifully shows how a small act of understanding and effort can bring people closer together. It's a nice lesson in empathy and the power of recognizing the little things that make each of us unique. I really enjoyed reading it, and it made me reflect on my own experiences with names and cultural differences.